Alright, gonna have a look at E11S here, which is Proteans the Fight. Proteans and Stacks, the fight. Should assign clock spots, essentially, and have your tanks and healers in the cardinals, and then the DPS in the intercardinals. And then you'll partner up the same way you do in most fights and have the tanks and healers rotate clockwise, and that'll be their partner. Or counterclockwise if you prefer. But yeah. The normal sort of thing you pull in the middle here. Elemental Break here is what it's casting is a Protean Wave. However, there is a gimmick to this fight, essentially, where the boss will have this element around it. Right now we see this fire element. So whenever it does one of its three main mechanics, one of which is Elemental Break, so the Protean Wave, it'll follow up with an additional effect, if you will. So, in the case of the fire element, it is a stack. So it'll be a Protean Wave into a two-person stack with your partner. So we'll see the Protean Wave there on each individual person, and then everyone is pairing up as their partners, with their partners. To soak the AoE there, which would kill someone if they took it solo. I will apologize, by the way, while I remember, for this blurry video. Normally I'd play on an ultra-wide monitor. I'm recording this at 1920 by 1080, and yeah, the recording didn't turn out too well. But yeah. So, Elemental Break, Protean Wave. Burnt Strike is what I like to call in Final Fantasy XIV a Guillotine, and this goes back to E11S, where I guess that terminology was sort of picked up. But essentially, Burnt Strike is a laser that's about the length of the size of the boss's hitbox, I guess, the width of it, in the north and the south of him. So you gotta be directly on his sides, essentially. And the effect here is when it is fire, which is what we're seeing right now. He's got this fire effect around him here, which you can see. That is a knockback, so it'll be a guillotine into a knockback. We're all going to move to the sides there. Unfortunately, I'm going to leave my ley lines. I'm going to do this giant cleave here through the north and the south, the width of his hitbox, so a guillotine. And then it will be immediately followed by a knockback. You can shortcast this, which I've done there, but others didn't, and got knocked back. So again, Bound of Faith is the third main mechanic in this fight, I guess, the third repeating mechanic, and the effect that we're seeing here is once again the fire element for it. Which essentially just is a party soak, which you take on the back of the boss, essentially. Now, it can be random what it is here. It'll either be fire or lightning at the start. It's not always going to be fire like this, where it's fire, fire, fire. It can be one of the two possibilities, and then later on there'll be a third possibility introduced, which is light, I guess, is what I'll call it. And I'll cover those when we do see them. But nevertheless, so... the person who is tethered, which is me here, unfortunately, normally you just go to the back and soak it there. I was slow, I guess, moving. So I was tethered to the boss there. It was kind of hard to see. I'll see if angle of it maybe. So you can sort of just see it. So he's casting Bound of Faith. I've got the tether here. The fire effect appears around him, so I know it's a party stack. And ideally, you would just go to the bottom of the boss there and soak it, but the party's going to come. Just soak it there as a group. Vanish Glory is just the AoE throughout the fight. It does apply a dot, so it's good addle, reprisal, and good value from anything that reduces damage, right? So that applies to the dot as well. And then we see this here. I honestly don't quite remember the name of the spell, but it's something of the heavens, right? You could see it there, I guess, on the cast bar as well while I was casting. But essentially, what happens here is it places these circles around the arena here, right? Now this will occur later on again. You'll see these circles again, and you will need to pay attention later on to what element he has. But right now, for the first one, it's always fire. So you want to go to the opposite. So for the first one, you always want to go to this side here. And so the way that you can sort of tell is this little nipple here in the southeast quadrant is sort of the safe spot. And most party finder groups would have the party pull up to the end here, but you are actually safe here. And so what's going to essentially happen is that these circles are all going to explode. However, the ones that were attuned to his element at the start of the cast, so for this particular iteration of these circles, it's always fire, but later on it could be either. But whichever one was attuned to the element will explode in a larger AoE. And it's quite large, so it's gonna be a larger circle, right? So that's why we're hiding next to the blue ones here, because he was attuned fire rather than lightning, and so the blue ones are only going to explode of their size. So you still don't want to stand into them, but so long as you're not standing in the blue ones, you're fine. The other thing to note here is kind of hard to see. Is that the tank's going to stand off on his own over on this side, right? And so the reason for that is when the tank buster, when he gets hit by the tank buster, it'll apply a debuff to him, essentially that will explode in a point blank AoE, right? So he's got to go stand off on his own. We actually had the off tank provoke, so also the tank is over there, right? And he's going to explode in a second. You can see the flash there. And at the same time, the circles explode as well, right? And so we're safe so long as we're next to the blue ones. And then that essentially is the first phase over, and he's doing nothing new here really. He's just going to do another burn strike again, which is a guillotine. This time he's attuned for lightning, and what that means is essentially it'll do the cleave through the north and the south, but then it'll do a larger it'll widen essentially. It'll explode again, but through the north and the south, but it'll be wider. You just need to pull off the boss. You'll see what I mean here. So if cast finishes, first explosion, and then the second explosion. We'll go back and pause it for. Cast finishes, first explosion, and the second explosion, a much bigger explosion, and it works out to be essentially sort of the width of this inner circle here, right? Of course, yeah, you just essentially got to pull off the boss there. So this is Bound of Faith, so this is the tether. So a random person in the party will get tethered. And essentially what has to happen here is they pull it between the two tanks in the north, so they'll be standing between the two tanks in the north. And then the person who is tethered will shoot giant cleaves at the two closest people. So again, the two tanks, because it is sort of a mini tank buster, I guess. So we'll ideally cool it down with what you can. And you just want to have the tank standing in such a way that the butt of the boss is clear, right? So that you won't cleave the party and kill them, right? And you'll see this here. So shoots these two wide conal attacks out at the two closest people. So they just stand on one side each of the person who had the tether. And of course, elemental break. This one is lightning. So this is just a protean into a spread. So each person after their protean will get hit by a single target explosion on themselves, right? Just a circular AoE around them. We eat our proteans and then we just spread out a little bit to make sure we don't cleave each other. And then finally we go into Shifting Sky, which is our first downtime mechanic of the fight. So it's important that you pay attention to what element he was charging. So in this case he was charging lightning, and you can tell that by the only way really to tell that is by his animation. So the dragon flying around him will have a elemental effect, and in this case it was lightning, which essentially means we want to get knocked towards the east side of the arena. because there'll be fire circles here. If it was the opposite color, we'd want to get knocked towards the west side. If you get knocked towards the wrong side, it's not too big of a deal. You can just run over really quick. But you want to be on the side of the opposite element, right? Because the lightning circles are going to explode in larger AoEs, because that's what he attuned to, right? Now, we sort of did this when we were doing this, we sort of did this backwards to what most party finders would do, but essentially what's happening here is there'll be like 2 clones of himself around the outside of the arena. And one will be lightning attuned and the other will be fire attuned. The fire attuned group just want to stack together, whereas the person who has the lightning attunement will go to the other side away from where the party is stacking. And the 2 tanks will obviously bait the 2 giant conal cleaves, right, from the lightning tether. So nothing new really happening here. The only thing, again, is that party finder would do the opposite way, so they'd have the party stacking with the fire tether in the south and the tanks in the north, whereas it's sort of back to front here. But again, either way works. It's no big deal. And you'll see that here. So the people who have the tethers will get lifted, the circles will explode at the same time, fire stack will happen, and the 2 conals will be baited from the lightning stack. And so then what's going to happen next, essentially, is the 2 clones around the outside will do their guillotines with their elemental effect, and it'll be the lightning one first, followed by the fire one. So lightning one, it guillotines, and then wider explosion, fire one into knockback. And again, you can shortcast or arm's length it necessary. So this is Protean wave again, so just standard fire Protean wave, so you'll stack with your partners after the Protean. Look at me not standing in that asylum. Into the AoE there. So the dot again, so good idea to reprise all that, right? You know, during the cast, addle it. Alright, so this is the light effect that we can see around him. So this is the 3rd possibility, right? And the 3rd possibility only shows up in this, from this 2nd phase onwards, right? And so, Elemental Break is the Protean wave once again. So you go to your clock spots initially. However, for the 2nd component, it will do Tsukiyomi cleaves, I guess is sort of the terminology I like to use. But essentially what it is it'll be... It's a party stack on the 2 party groups, so 1 healer and 2 DPS, and then the tanks, right? So it's 3 cleaves that need to be taken by those 3 separate groups, right? So you just essentially stack up on your side. You have 2 DPS and the healer on each side, then the 2 tanks in the north, and they'll soak these cleaves together. See here. So it just requires fast movement, that one. So you go to your Protean spots, and then you quickly collapse on, if you're a DPS, you quickly collapse on your healers, who will be in the east and the west in most parties. And then the off tank would usually be in the south, and he'll just quickly run through to the north to join the main tank. So this is the light attuned Guillotine. So Bird Strike is Guillotine, and it's light attuned. So again, north and the south, he's just going to cleave right through the width of his hitbox in that direction. And then you'll wait a brief moment for this one, and he'll sort of slam the ground, there'll be a flash, and then you'll just move clockwise around. And this is because when he does that flash and slams the ground, right, it's going to snapshot that position that you were in for a AoE, right? Just a circular AoE that will appear there. So we'll see that here. So the guillotine will happen first, which is that there. Then he flashes. You saw that with his gun there briefly. Then immediately after that flash, everyone's moving just to where no one else was previously, right? So in this case, the south and the north were safe because we were stacked on the east and west. And you see this explosion there, right? So it snapshots when that flash happens, and then after a few seconds, the explosion will occur. And then finally, this is the light tether. The catch here is that they just need to essentially take it by themselves. No one else wants to be in it, otherwise you'll take extra unnecessary damage. So anyone caught in this tether will essentially explode after a brief while, and there's the explosion there, and it'll do AoE damage. So the more people caught in that, the more damage that'll come out from the explosion that follows. You can probably survive like maybe one person catching it, especially if you shield it appropriately. But ideally only one person takes it. Damage is quite manageable. And then he follows that immediately up with AoE there, so some quick shielding and mitigation as well. And to the Tank Buster again. I should also say that you're meant to swap during the Tank Buster. I guess I forgot that earlier, right? So the Tank Buster essentially applies a vulnerability up onto the target. The Tank Buster is called Powder Mark, by the way. So the tank will receive a vulnerability up, which you can sort of see there, right? So he can't be tanking anymore because of that vulnerability up. And they'll also apply a debuff, which will explode in a point blank, like circular AoE around him, right? So you just need to swap, and then when that debuff's going to explode, which is generally, to the best of my knowledge, always during mechanics, you'll just need to be standing away from the party. So here we go. He's doing another downtime mechanic here, right? So you need to pay attention to the element. Oh, sorry, this isn't a downtime mechanic, but nevertheless, you need to pay attention to the element. In this case, he's attuning lightning. And he spawns these big mirror-looking things here. And essentially, same as always, you want to go to the opposite color. These are the fire mirrors that you want to go towards, and they're just going to shoot beams, right? And so this little safe, more like a triangle right in here, ends up being, as well as the edges around. It's kind of hard to see. But so the tank who had the powder mark debuff has gone off by themselves, so they don't cleave the party in the safe spot, and they can go to either of the ones on the wall, right? You sort of see it here, right? All the beams go out, and so you end up with a safe square here, a safe square down there, and a safe square over here. On the color opposite to the element opposite to what he attuned, right? Is where the safe spots will be. Burn Strike is Guillotine. It's light attuned, so we're just going to wait for the flash to abate those explosions, and then we'll move. Bound of Faith is Tether. It's fire attuned, so it's a party soak, whole party, so all stack for that. One interesting tidbit here, I'll actually briefly mention. You might have seen it just there. I wonder if we can catch it, right? So if you're under the boss's hitbox when you get tethered, he will push you out of his hitbox. If you're a caster, right, or it'll cancel your cast, right, if you're casting during it. So with your tether, don't stand under the hitbox, because he'll push you out in, a random direction, I guess, whichever is the shortest path to get you out of his hitbox. And it'll cancel your cast. So just a small tip: just if you're standing outside of his hitbox, he won't push you around, and he won't cancel your cast. But yeah, so nevertheless, fire tether, you just soak it. And then Protean here, so Fire Protean will be a partner stack, essentially, after the clock spots. And Sundered Sky is our next downtime mechanic. So you want to pay attention to the element that he was attuning. In this case, he was attuning fire. But for Sundered Sky, you want to actually get knocked. So there'll be this knockback occurring at the start of it. You want to get knocked back towards the the element. And the reason for this is that his dragon will appear in the middle, and he will, as you get knocked back, the dragon will randomly target one of the 8 people. And you'll essentially do a giant cleave that leaves only his butt safe towards a person. So you just bait towards the side that isn't safe. So fire is what he attunes, so fire isn't safe, so we're just going to bait the dragon towards there by getting knocked towards there. And then you just run around towards the safe side. Now, the other thing that's happening here is there is a bunch of tethers. So there's a fire tether, and then there's also a light tether, right? The light tether person just needs to go stand off by themselves, whereas the fire tether will stack on the inside towards this blue death puddle, right? So you're just stacking on the inside towards there, you'll be in the safe spot there, whereas the person with the light tether who wants to soak it by themselves will be standing over here. Or up here. I guess it doesn't essentially matter too much, I think. Unless I'm getting something. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So yeah, they can be on either one. And you just eat your soaks. Now what we're doing here is essentially, so there's two ways really to deal with this. Sorry, let me deal with that. Sorry about that. So there's two ways essentially to deal with this. So this way is known as Mario Kart essentially, and it's sort of just to run around the circle and YOLO it, right? So you want to go to the edge here. It's not always going to work out that you're necessarily on by the lightning. The light attuned clone. But he'll essentially do his guillotines in the order of light, lightning, then fire. There's 3 of them, all back to back. And Mario Kart sort of just dictates that you run around the arena. It can get a little finicky because you don't want to be running into the lightning one as he explodes, right? But nevertheless, I'll sort of show you how this plays out. Light guillotine first, and then he'll snapshot that point AoE, and we'll just run around. Lightning next, wider explosion, fire last with knockback. So you can Mario Kart it like that, which is certainly a valid way to deal with it. But this video here by FFXIV Siggy will show what is known as brain dead strat, right? So he's cast Sundered Sky, get knocked back towards the element that he was attuned to, so fire again in their case. Run to the opposite side, fire will stack, light tether will go off by themselves. Then the party will essentially, on the inner circle, right, they'll wait on the edge of the inner circle there. Sorry, I'll let go first. They'll wait on the edge of the inner circle, but not in a spot where the guillotines are going to go through, right? They'll just wait for the light guillotine to go through, and then for the snapshot to occur. Just then, and then after the snapshot occurred, they'll run to the edge of the arena in one of these intercardinals, right, where the cleaves aren't going to go through. So lightning guillotine went off there, larger explosion, but because they're here, right, they're safe. The light snapshot explosion was there, they're safe. The fire's going to go through there, they'll still be safe. The only thing they need to worry about is the knockback. That can sort of be confusing to sort of follow, I think. So I'll include the link for this video in the description, I guess, and if you need, you can look it over a few times and try to dissect what's exactly happening there, right? But in practice, brain dead strat is what Party Finder would mostly use in my experience. And I also think it's safer, right? It's just a better strat than running around. It's more controlled. But once that's finished, he just reappears, and you're essentially in what is third phase here. So again, Elemental Break is a protean wave, so your clock spots. It was light attuned, so into your Tsukiyomi stacks. So this is the AoE here. Burnished Glory is the AoE cast. And then, so we're going to see the mirrors again here when he casts turn into... Oh, no, sorry. The circles, yeah, sorry. So, what's happening here, right, is... So, he's fire attuned here, right? So, once again, it's the same sort of thing as before, right? So, you want to be by the opposite, so you want to be by lightning, except it's rotating essentially. So we fire into lightning, into fire, into lightning. You know, it'll be one then the other, right? And so the simple way to deal with this is to essentially just go against right up to the edge, and you hug the wall right up in the corner of the lightning puddle, right, or the opposite colored opposite element, right? And then during this, he is attuning to another element. Again, it's random, so it can be either. In this case, he's fire attuned, so it'll be proteans into stacks. So essentially, what you'll see here is everyone's hugging the safe circle in their area, right? And then those will explode. The proteans will happen at the same time here, which you see, and then followed by. In this case, because it was fire, it was stack, but if it was lightning, it'd be spread. Now, there is an uptime strat for that, which I won't cover here, but I'll include a link for that in the description. It's honestly been a while since I've looked at the specifics of it. It's for melee, essentially, to keep uptime during that instead of having to pull off. I believe it only works when fire's safe. So I could be wrong on that. Maybe it does work on both, or maybe it's... I'm not exactly sure on the specifics, right? But nevertheless, it's essentially very simple. You just hug the outside wall with your partner. You'll eat a protean wave, and then you just have to do either stack or spread. It'll never be light there. It'll be either fire or lightning. Yeah. So Powder Mark, Tank Buster. Swap during the cast, and then tank the debuff times out will explode. So he's attuning lightning here into the mirrors. So this is essentially the exact same thing as it's always been, except the catch here is that he will tether to a random person in the party. So it can be anything. It can be it can be either light or fire, right? It can't be lightning for this one, but it'll either be light or fire. So the catch is here essentially is that you're going to make use of all three safe spots. So the tank who ate the tank buster is going off down here because he will explode. The party is stacking on the inside, then the lightning tether is going over here. So you just need to generally assign some rule for where you're going to have the tank go and where you're going to have the light tether go if it is a light tether. If it's a fire tether, it's really easy. You know, they're just going to stack with the party. But you need to make use of all three safe spots. You can eyeball it as well, of course. It is honestly quite forgiving in that respect. But having some rule, nevertheless, does help. Essentially, yeah. So, nothing special there. You're in the safe spot. The tether will resolve. The tether will, of course, then explode in AoE damage on the party, as we see just then. But yeah. Nothing crazy there. He jumps back to the middle, and then he's going to cast what is called Prismatic Deception, I believe it is. And so, if from the burn dungeon, essentially, if you remember the final boss, how the arena gets covered in mist, and then you can only see the dragon at the edge of the arena, right? When you're right next to it, he's only visible to you when you're right next to him. And so To resolve this, we're having all of the parties spread out in their clock spots right up against the wall around the arena. And then you need to conceptually understand that there is a clone behind each person, but each person can only see their own clone. And this is because, again, like in the burn, right? It's only when you're close to the clone that you can see it. So there's these 8 clones around the arena. And if the clone raises their hand, which unfortunately we don't see here, so he has his hand down, right? But if the clone raises his hand, and you'll be holding it up in the air like this, then he's going to do a guillotine through that quadrant, right? And so it's really simple way to resolve this is to essentially, if the clone behind you raises your hand, raises his hand, you'll run into the middle. If the person directly opposite you raises his hand, then you know that that person... if the person directly opposite you runs into the middle, then you know that the clone behind that person raised their hand, which means that he will be cleaving through your quadrant as well, right? So I'm looking towards Alex Fellwinter, opposite me there. He's running into the middle, which means I've gone back 10 seconds here. So again, I'm only looking at my clone and Alex. I see Alex running in, so I immediately run in. And then everyone else is running in if they themselves had their clone raise their hand, or the person opposite them started to run in. And then where the 2 people left on the wall is where the safe spot will be, right? And that's because all the other quadrants will get shot through. And you'll see that here. So all the clones will become visible, or all the real clones, I guess, the ones that are actually going to shoot, become visible, and they'll shoot through. And there'll just be little triangle safe spots on either side, where the 2 remaining people were. So don't run in if your clone's hand staying down, or the person opposite you stands still, right? And that's known as Fox Mist. So if you see Party Finder saying Fox Mist, that's what they're talking about there. I don't think in practice anyone deals with this in any other way. Not that I'm aware of anyway. So but yeah, Party Finder calls this Fox Mist. And you just have to do it twice. So just go, after the first one, you go back to your clock spots and you do it the second time. In that case, my clone. Gone back to our clock spots, and then my clone here does raise his arm. I'm running into them, and we go to where the people who remained on the wall were. After that, the boss will reappear, and you're in the final phase here. It's totally possible to kill the boss by this point. Even before the Prismatic Deception thing, if you have some respectably high DPS. But if not, probably very soon after here. And this boss is very reminiscent to E11S, right? Where he's going to do what are known as cycles at the end, which is essentially just bang, 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 3... the 3 main mechanics of the Tethers, the Protean, and the Guillotines, all back to back, essentially. Not in that order. Yeah. Skipping this, if you can, with good DPS, is always welcome, because this is probably one of the meaner mechanics in the fight. Especially since there's 3 of them right before Enrage. But essentially, he will... begin casting a Cycle of Faith here, right? And it's attuned to fire. So it'll always be Protean into Guillotine into the Tether. So we go into our clock spots, and we'll do our partner stacks, because it's fire attuned, remember? So clock spots, partner stacks. We move out of the Guillotine's path next. Move into the east and west of the boss, left and right of the boss. And then after the Guillotine is a knockback, again, because it's fire attuned. and then it's the party soak tether. Which again, is a little messy here. We brought it onto the hitbox of the boss, not realizing that push it out in a random direction. Ideally, you would just have that person run to the bot of the boss, and then the whole party would meet up there, knowing that that is the spot to meet. And so he's doing 3 of these Cycle of Faiths, once each element, right? 1 for each element. And all things contained in that cycle will have the attunement of that element. So the first one was fire attuned. I'm going to do a Cycle of Faith, right? Again, that'll be lightning attuned. And he's doing AoEs between this, right? So he did Burnish Glory between that. So we've got dots going into the dot going into this, right? Ticking down our health. So it's quite a nasty heal check, right? And it's random which order these attunements on the Cycle of Faiths are appearing. So this one is lightning, so it's Proteans into spread. Alright, so we're spreading here from our Protean. We'll go to the left and the right to avoid the Guillotine, which will then explode wider. And then finally it's the tank tether, so they take that tether to the north while everyone else is hiding on the butt. They'll just point the cleaves away from the party. The Colonel cleaves there, pointed away from the party. Is baited by the tanks. And you'll do another Burnish Glory, some more AoE here. And you'll want some mitigation planning going into this because it does hurt. Again, respectable DPS, it'll probably be skipped. But especially with Echo nowadays, right? But finally, light tether. So Proteans into Tsukiyomi stacks. Into Guillotine with the baited AoE, so we're waiting for the flash, and then we'll move to the north and the south. And then the light tether, right? So everyone wants to move away from that person. Ideally, assigning some spot for where they're going to be is probably what you want to do, right? And I think Party Finder would assign the north, right, and have the party all move to the south. But don't quote me on that, right? I'm not 100% positive. But yeah, that is essentially E11S there. There's nothing really else that's happening. To the best of my knowledge, I think it's just AoE into, yeah, Enrage here, right? So the Enrage cast. But yeah, that's E11S. It's a pretty fun fight, but a very standard Final Fantasy XIV fight. Literally, Proteans, stack waves, guillotines, the fight. But it's fun. Anyway, thank you for watching.